Hi there, Mandy Friedman here, licensed professional clinical counselor, clinically certified domestic violence counselor, clinically certified trauma professional level 2, the creator of SNAP, survivors of narcissistic and abusive personalities. I'm here with Melanie Mize and Michelle Minette with Family Court Empowerment Coaching, and we are talking about the cost of fairness. Now, you remember our first installment of this topic, we focused on parenting plans and parenting time. Today, we're going to talk about decision making and how parenting plans assign decision making and how fairness may not necessarily be what is healthy for kids. Let's do some quick introductions. I introduced myself, but Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Melanie?
I'm Michelle Minette. I am a certified holistic life coach and ABD psychologist with experience in forensic psychology and personality disorders. And so I run with Melanie. I am family court empowerment coaching, where we help people through the family court process and collaborate with attorneys.
And Melanie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Melanie Mize. I am a licensed family law attorney in the state of Ohio. I work as a guardian ad litem, a mediator, and as a parenting coordinator.
Both of these women know their stuff. They're experts in their field. They have a lot to share with us. So asking these questions can be so helpful to people that don't understand the process. It's confusing, and we know what's good for kids, right? And how does that get lost in the mix when it comes to custody, parenting plans, and family court? So that's what we're here to discuss today. First, let's define custody. What does it mean? What is custody? Melanie, maybe you can answer this question for us.
So when a family court is talking about custody of a minor child, they're referring most often to the decision making for that child. Who is going to make major decisions?
And can you tell us, what are the categories of decision making that we're talking about? I assume that it would be, specific to different parts of the child's life.
Yeah, so these decision making categories that are encompassed in the idea of custody are really major things for the child. So we're talking about their healthcare decisions, educational decisions, religious upbringing, as well as just what types of activities the child will participate in. So like extracurricular activities, school groups, or things like that.
I'd like to point out too that people often confuse this because custody sounds like it's about having something, right? And so so we tend to, and it makes sense, confuse it with visitation or parenting schedules. And it does not have to do with that.
So there's the parent who has the legal custody of the child, and that's referring to that decision making. And that parent will have that legal custody regardless of where the child is physically located. And then beyond that, there's who has the physical custody of the child at any point in time. So one parent may have primary physical custody where the child is with them most of the time, and the other parent has this secondary physical custody, say they have weekends or something like that. And then sometimes parents will have a joint physical custody where you have more of an even split of time, or maybe a 60-40 split, something like that.
That's not confusing at all.
Yeah. But when we're talking about who's going to have custody of a child, when we're going through a divorce proceeding, we're really looking at who is going to make those big decisions for the child. Whose school district will the kid be registered in? Who's going to decide on vaccinations or things like that, major healthcare decisions?
And within that topic of decision making is the concept of fairness that, as usual, just tends to enter in when you have two parents that are battling over control, battling over time, and how their future is going to play out with their kids and parenting. They want it to be fair, but fairness is not always what's healthy or best. So I was hoping that maybe we could give an example of when fair decision making, meaning that both parents have equal decision making rights, how would that be harmful to a child, perhaps?
So about a week ago, I was discussing with a client some of the realities of divorce and the decisions that you have to make with regard to where the children live and who's going to make the decisions for them, like the custody, right? And in that, they actually said to me, yeah, but I wanted to make it fair for their other parent. And I stopped and I said, that is exactly why we started this court coaching business, was because that is the default, whether it's said or not. It's the default in people's mind. When we talk about fairness, they're thinking about the parents. They're not thinking about what's fair for the child. And so my response was, that's the problem. We're thinking about fairness for the other parent, right? And so when we stop, we can stop that train of thought and catch those defaults, which is the whole.
What courts are doing is they're weighing the parent's constitutional rights to parent, because that is something that the United States Supreme Court has determined is a constitutional right. And then they're weighing that with what is in the best interest of the children. There's a little bit of what's fair to the parents, what's fair to the kids in there, but overall you've got to look at what's really in the best interest of the children, because otherwise, if we focus too much on what's fair for these parents and we're not looking at what's in the best interest of the kids as much, that's where I think courts are perpetuating generational trauma, and they're just creating the next round of litigants that will be before them. I kind of fall more heavily on that. What is going to be fair for the kids and in the kids' best interest? So when it comes to the joint decision making and kind of favoring joint custody or shared parenting, how much is the court really looking into, did the parents even have a setup like that during the marriage? Were they dividing child tasks in a symmetrical fashion? Were they both participating? Or was one parent taking the lead on everything? Because really that can be a predictor of how successful are they going to be sharing these responsibilities post-divorce.
If they've already been performing these duties, responsibilities, and they have been sharing it in a certain way, somewhat equally, and that will then provide consistency for the child, then in that case, that could be what's healthy for the children.
When you have these parents that they don't want to be together anymore, they're separating, they're getting a divorce. When you then really thrust them into a place where they're both having to participate in this major decision making constantly, if they're not ready to do that, one of the impacts is going to be the parents' individual stress and their mental health. And that is going to be a detriment to them. And that's going to pass through to the kids. If mom is super stressed out or dad is really depressed or something like that, that's going to impact those kids. So how much stress are we putting on that family system right off the bat?
Well, also, it just dawned on me, especially while you were talking, how many parents who are still married, even happily and living together, discuss every single thing. I mean, don't they parse out different things related to parenting and the children anyway? Fair play, even that's the solution to problems with chores and activities that married couples have to figure out around the house, especially when they have children. So not only are we putting pressure on them to do something they no longer want to do, but I think we're putting pressure on them to do something they never did before, and no other couple really does to that extent.
There are other variables that can be in play. For example, for a child who has specific medical needs or specific mental health needs or specific educational needs, we really risk destabilizing a child who relies upon one parent or has relied upon one parent to meet those special needs. And often not both parents are as informed about those special needs. One person might do more of the research and learn more about it, and then the other parent might do a little bit more of just, letting that other parent take the lead, or maybe they're not interested at all. And now we're in a situation where the parent who's been used to taking care of that child and knowing that their needs are met is going to have to somehow share that responsibility with someone they don't get along with. I think that is a situation where you really are risking not just destabilizing the child, destabilizing the parent, but destabilizing the entire system that works to support that child.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of situations where I've worked with families that have a child with certain educational needs, and all of a sudden you have both parents saying, hey, I'm going to attend the IEP meeting or the 504 meeting, and it's got to have my seal of approval. And they get in there and they say, I don't know why we have all these different accommodations in here. We don't need all this. This plan's real complicated. And it's like, yeah, you do. And what you're doing by taking those accommodations out is putting stress on the child at school. They're not going to be able to accomplish the things they need to in that environment. You're also then putting stress on the teachers and on the other students in that class. So if one parent is not as well informed as the other, it doesn't necessarily make sense to suddenly have that parent in an equal decision-making capacity.
And while they're going through the divorce, the relationship is contentious, right? And so then you run the risk of performative intrusion, right? Where the parent feels the need to have their mark on it to show that they care without being up to date on the research, the history, or even being aware of where they are in the treatment of the child and what's happened and what hasn't. I kind of want to normalize that, because I feel like the way the system operates with that, it almost asks parents to do that. I want them to be aware of it, and I don't think it's okay. But also, I don't want to shame people who accidentally do that, or don't realize they're doing that, because, it's coerced a little bit.
It's really important for people to be okay with not knowing what they don't know, and just admitting to it and say, this isn't my wheelhouse. I'm going to defer to someone else on that. I think that's pretty key to raising healthy kids.
Well, if they didn't weaponize not having the knowledge too, right? Like, it's a whole culture shift. I think that brings out that what we're talking about is a whole culture shift with regard to family court and putting these plans together that, we're asking to take the blame out.
Remember that a lot of these situations, we have a high conflict personality in the mix, possibly. And they will, just for the sake of winning, want to have control over something that they have no business having control over, just so that they can say that they have control over it. Also, we have passive aggressive sabotage that can go on with high conflict personalities. Just recently in my world, we had a minor who is attending therapy and has been for a while, doing really well in therapy. Mom and dad have an IPV incident, that's intimate partner violence, domestic violence incident in the home. There seems to be that there's going to be an impending divorce, protection order or something. And dad reaches out to say that he no longer approves of the child having therapy. Everything's been fine. No reason why, other than he was just trying to, in an impotent kind of way, flex his power and authority over the family. So you have people involved that they don't really care about the best interest of the child, their own child. They're more interested in winning or how they appear from other people's perspectives. And the idea of like, well, maybe it'd be good for my kid to continue with their therapist that they've been with for a year is not at the top of their thought process there. Doesn't mean that's happening all the time, but often when we're discussing these sorts of parenting plan evaluations and resetting parenting situations, sometimes there's someone in there that really doesn't have the best interest of the kid in mind. And then you have a parent who's trying their hardest to use countermeasures to balance it out. Like, okay, well, I'll be the one that makes sure that all this stuff happens. And then they have been probably the one driving the bus on that decision making. And now they're at risk of losing a say on some very important matters in relationship to what's good for their kids. It's scary.
I was just thinking, as you were talking about that when we're looking at whether or not to have a joint custody or shared parenting arrangement, one of the biggest things that we talk about is, are the individual parents able to make the decision themselves? Do they even have the information they need to make a decision if they were doing it all by themselves, let alone making it jointly? I don't know that we're really examining that to the extent that we should.
As we explore this, like splitting up the decisions or keeping the decision making consistent through and post divorce with what it was pre-divorce, based on what's best for the kids to have routine and stability and expectations in their lives, right? One of the problems we might run into is, what do we do about the spouses or the parents that were doing everything and now have to get a job, or the parents where they were in a relationship where there was a bunch of weaponized incompetence, or the other parent is now going to use them as a secretary because they're in charge of the school making decisions.
So there's a disproportionate amount of responsibility, and that can weigh on the more functional parent of having to carry all of those things. It would be nice if we could work together in the best interest of the children. And you would think that would be just sort of like a basic human understanding. But I think when you have people involved who are fearful of the other person having that kind of control, but then the ego can't handle, right, the loss of the control. Mm-hmm. And now we are engaged in a battle over something that doesn't have anything to do with the kids, as it turns out. But the weaponized incompetence factor, what you're talking about where it's disproportionate, you mentioned fair play. You've mentioned a couple of times. Would you tell us a little bit more about that so that someone could find that if they wanted to?
They can send us advertising points or something for this, but fair play is, it's a deck of cards that a couple of professional women who were married to men that realized that they were also, even though in their high power jobs, they were disproportionately carrying the weight of project management, not just of the duties around the house, but being the project manager for all of the chores around the house. And so fair play was their solution to the cognitive load, to the invisible work, to the weaponized incompetence, to the decision fatigue. So those are all the buzzwords for it. But basically what it does is it helps to create a partnership with the chores around the house and the things that need to be done in a household, including parenting, where the couples sit down, they agree on how it should be done, and then one person takes over doing that chore or that task, and the other parent's not allowed to bring it up until they meet again, right? And so I encourage all couples to actually look it up, and I'm working on adjusting it with my clients to use for parenting with their kids and assigning chores for them as well.
So in an ideal situation, a similar approach could be used to not only see, what kind of an arrangement is best for the kids, but by creating an arrangement that's also good for the parents, which then is also good for the children at the same time. That's in an ideal scenario where we can all sit down at the table and have meaningful conversation.
Fair play for co-parenting.
What goes along with that is the concept of parallel parenting. We don't need to have joint everything all the time. If one parent is fantastic at, looking into educational opportunities and researching school districts and really knowing what's going on in that world, maybe they're the parent that takes the lead on the education matters. Maybe there's another parent there that is great with whatever it may be, and you kind of put that field with that parent and divide and conquer in that way. So allow them to do it in separate households as well.
A strength-based approach.
Instead of the micromanaging that the attorneys and the JAL and the evaluators and everybody, the judge does, right? Yeah, instead of the micromanaging, let's not give you fish, let's teach you how to fish, right? Yeah, I like that a lot because it also includes meetings. And so you would have a meeting to discuss and agree on what should happen with the task. But it could be, in this case, maybe it's we sit down and we take all of the input and then I'm going to do this task. You don't bug the other parent about it, so they don't become the secretary, right? In between, and then you meet again just like you do in business. And we teach, when we teach the mandatory parenting classes, we always talk about you now have a business relationship. So just like in a business where everybody's working on their own, heading their own projects, you meet, you discuss what's gone well first to make it easier to talk about what you'd like to see improved, and then go back to doing your tasks.
On that, business metaphor, I think then sometimes, we really have to acknowledge when a meeting can be an email. There are definitely families that need to make those meetings emails.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to triple down on that in writing, having something in writing and is really optimal for a number of reasons, including the neurobiology of it all. It gives your prefrontal cortex a little more control in your executive functioning. You get a chance to go back and review things. You can think it through. I always recommend to my clients that as much as humanly possible that we do things in writing, and that's best for both parties. Best for both parties. We can all go back and look. You can go back and look. I can go back and look. And then there's no misunderstandings.
There would have to be like discussion points or input requests or some way to gather information or to have check-ins on how the task or the project is going. And so,
and not using the child as the go-between.
That's a whole, yes. It's all another video. Child's not the messenger.
Right. The child's not the messenger, and the child has feedback, but also the child isn't the one that is the decision maker either. We're dividing up decision making. The child has a voice, right? But the child shouldn't be driving the bus necessarily.
And it depends on what it is. I hear parents, not healthy parents, use that often as an excuse to keep from making a decision and to invite the child in or to make the other parent look bad, right? And often it's with teenagers. It's the last stage of development. It's social emotional. They should not be solely responsible for making social emotional decisions. But oftentimes you'll even say, well, the child is choosing to live, and because they're older now, they should be able to. And there's so many other factors that go into those decisions. So yes, never driving the bus, but incrementally giving them input without tipping your hand for what parent supports what before the parents have time to discuss the decision.
Decision making on health, education, religion, social aspects. Who are we hanging out with? What are we spending our time doing? Extracurriculars. Those are the kinds of decisions that get divvied out in a custody situation where we're coming up with a new plan. And like we said before, it's tough how things get mixed in with fairness and what would be fair for the parents, and not necessarily focusing on the ultimate health of the child, what is healthiest for the kids. It's a tough spot to be in. And Melanie, you mentioned a few minutes ago how that what the court is ultimately doing is they're balancing the rights, the legal rights of the parents with what is best for kids. And I think, that's probably where we get lost a lot of times, is into that fairness aspect, and just that culturally, what's fair, it just sounds like things should be fair and equal. And that assuming that is just what would be best, or that, kids need both parents. And so both parents should be equally involved because that's what's best. But that's not always the case, as we've been finding through our work.
We don't have courts of equality. We have courts of equity. So what we're really looking at is not having it equal necessarily, but it needs to be equitable to everyone involved.
So explain what that means.
Like, that's your true fairness. It's not necessarily that things are perfectly divided. We're looking at how it's going to impact each player, the children and each parent individually, as well as how does it impact the co-parenting relationship?
Right.
Because that, when you have a lot of conflict in that's going to flow through to those kids and really impact the quality of the parenting itself. And these are the things that really go into whether or not kids are going to have good outcomes. We've got to consider stuff like the ability and quality of co-parenting, the level of conflict, as well as each parent's mental health.
I agree. And I think that's kind of where I was headed to when I was talking about we have to be careful for the parents who are divorcing because they were overly relied upon, like to the point where, right, they didn't have a partnership in parenting. And so in the interest of keeping things consistent, that's important, but also making sure that the parents have the space and the time to breathe in their everyday life so that they can provide better quality parenting when they are present for it. We didn't actually explicitly say what the courts do now is they decide on joint custody, which means the parents have to agree on every decision that's made, or sole custody, where one parent tends to make all the decisions. And both of those, they're kind of all or nothing. And it's burdensome. And it's not how we naturally move through our marriage lives, our relationship lives, or our parenting lives.
It's also just kind of funny because you get into court in a divorce and they're pushing this concept of co-parenting and shared parenting, joint custody on these parents, but every single document says parent one versus parent two, like they're rock'em sock'em robots or something.
Right.
But the outcome is that you guys are going to be on opposite sides of one another on paper, but you have to be like doing things well together in real life. And it's just kind of funny to think of.
That's an excellent point. In our first segment on the cost of fairness, we talked about parenting time, parenting schedules. Today, we talked about decision making and how that can affect the health and well-being of the children. Next, we're going to talk about the cost of fairness as it relates to child support. And that's going to be an interesting one. That's going to be fun. But I just want to thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Michelle, for providing all this information for us and teaching us the things that you're teaching us. It's a really useful topic for people that are going through these things. A lot of times people feel alone, they feel confused, they feel misunderstood, they feel lost in the system. So it's really helpful to hear from people who really get it and have a compassionate way of conveying the information. Yeah. So thank you for watching or listening. Goodbye.